Hello, my lovely humans. I had an epiphany. I think I know how a juror could find in the Karen Read trial her as guilty, or the Commonwealth as proven their thing. We're going to do a long recap. I did do a couple of shorts on this, but this is going to be the longer version. So if legal stuff and law tube stuff doesn't interest you, I'll see you in the next video, my humans. But for those of you who don't know, I was following the Karen Read trial, watching the whole trial take place, and here we go. Those of you who don't know, Karen Read in Massachusetts, her cop boyfriend, John O'Keefe, was found dead last January, or January 2022. And the Commonwealth, or the prosecution in Massachusetts, claimed that Karen Read was intoxicated, but they got into a fight. She backed into him and then left him to die in the snow at his friend's house. The defense says that Karen Read is being used as a toss-away cover-up because the friend's house is another cop who has a whole bunch of connections in the town. And the investigation was so botched. The lead investigator, Trooper Proctor, not only did he lie about his connection to the Albert family where John O'Keefe was found, whose lawn he was found in, he said, oh, I don't know all these people, even though he was hanging out with Kevin Albert and all these other connections that came through. Also, during the investigation, the defense's thing brought up that he called Karen Read the R word, the R slur, and he called her "see you next Tuesday," a whack job, and made fun of her medical condition, and even jokingly claimed that he hadn't found any nudes while he was going through her phone, not just data pulls from her phone, but her physical phone in his hand, which is improper. And the other investigators were like, I don't know how to do an investigation in the snow, even though we live close to Boston, Massachusetts. And they were collecting evidence in red Solo Cup, and there was a bunch of missing and inverted videos, and the witnesses, I don't think, helped anybody in any way, shape, or form. For neither side. I think that everything went wrong for them all the way around. But the medical examiner and other professional medical people said that the wounds of John O'Keefe were inconsistent with being struck by a vehicle. He had no broken bones, no bruising, and his body was intact. He had a blunt force trauma wound to the back of the head, and what were confirmed to be affiliated bite wounds from a large animal, more than likely a large dog. And the Alberts had a German Shepherd. I say had because a couple months after all this happened, they rehomed their dog to Vermont. Oh, and did I mention that like 3 people in this case had their phones right before the day before they were going to have their data pulled? They got updated phones, which means all their previous text messages and information, bye-bye. It's like, okie dokie. And I did a whole rant on Jen McCabe, who was the star witness, because she's the one who claimed to have heard Karen Read say, I hit him over and over. And she was so combative and such a defensive witness. And then it turned out that she didn't start saying that Karen Read claimed that she hit him until after a pre-trial was done. And she was getting heat online and started getting some online backlash and harassment. Then she started claiming she heard that. So there was a lot of connections. There was a lot of mashed up things. And I was sitting there going, how could any juror, at first, I was livid about the hung jury, which is what happened. Spoiler alert. And it was like, but why? How could anyone see this terrible investigation, the lies involved, all the sus things. And every person, the morning of the person's death, oh, they all called each other, but they didn't actually call each other. They all just butt dialed back and forth repeatedly. You know how you always just randomly butt dial people with iPhones and smartphones these days, like back to back on a consistent basis, all in like the early morning hours. You know how that happens to you? No, it doesn't happen to any of us. It doesn't happen to anybody. You might get one butt dial or a couple butt dials here and there, but it is certainly not a consistent back and forth thing. Yeah. Anywho, I was mad. I was like, there is nothing but sus in this investigation. And if the investigation is sus to begin with, then the person is not guilty. The medical things, nothing lined up with Karen Read hitting her boyfriend and leaving him in the snow. In fact, her medical conditions were part of the reason why she did not want to stay. She has some digestive issues. She has a lot of tummy troubles. She's had a lot of surgeries. And so she was just like, I have to get home and take care of me. I'm not feeling well. I'm not going to go to party with the Alberts with you, boyfriend. You go do that. But then I thought about it. I'm like, what is another point of view that I was not seeing before? Because I was so convinced over here. What am I not seeing? And I think I've got it. How a juror could possibly not see it is because the defense's whole thing was that Karen Read was framed in a part of a cover-up. She was the patsy, right? And there was a lot of stuff that led up to that. But honestly, it wasn't hit on enough in closing. And there wasn't a lot of, this is the cover-up, this is what happened. There was a lot of explaining why the Commonwealth's case was poo and, pointing out the problems with the investigation. But I think some of the jurors were under the impression that they had to get proven or convinced of a cover-up and not just convinced of Karen Read's actions. And so because of that, I think that some of them, who want justice, jurors want to find the justice for people. They really do. I honestly believe that. And I think that because they weren't convinced of a cover-up, they were like, well, since you say she didn't do it because it was a part of a cover-up, they being the defense, and they didn't convince me of a cover-up, they didn't explain how the cover-up went down. They didn't give any possibilities. During the thing, it wasn't, oh, this person attacked this person. And there were so many ways they could have approached that. One of the people who was there had scabbed over bloody knuckles shortly after the incident, and they claimed it was Colin Albert, who tried to claim that he caught himself on a slippery driveway with his fist. Nobody does that. And there were videos of him picking fights with multiple people other times. So it was like, did he get into a fight at the Alberts' house? And then their dog, the German Shepherd, who does not do well, according to Brian Albert's own testimony with strangers, that he was attacked in the arm by the dog and he fell backwards down some stairs, or was hit in the back, or they got into a fight and he hit his head on something and then he was dragged outside. The defense did not do a great job at summing that up. They had a great closing. They were great at poking holes where they needed to poke holes. But I think that some of the jurors were under the impression that they weren't convinced of a cover-up, and since there wasn't a convincing cover-up, that means Karen Read did it. It was either a cover-up or Karen Read did it. They weren't convinced of a cover-up, so they went with Karen Read did it. Now, how that lines up with other things, but I'm also thinking that they're like, no, they didn't prove a cover-up. They said there was this cover-up, and it just seems like they don't like each other. And people don't have to like each other. It doesn't mean there's a cover-up of anything. And maybe some people were like, oh, I don't want to take that. I didn't like Jen McCabe or whoever. I didn't like them very well. But I'm trying to not be biased, so I'm going to agree with them to not be biased. And again, they want justice. They weren't convinced of the cover-up. and the cover-up wasn't explained very well. And if they didn't like Alan Jackson, who was very aggressive and had some serious overreaches throughout the trial, for instance, there was a very long while where he was trying to say that Brian Albert and the other people in the bar were like practicing fighting stances, and everyone's looking at that video going, that's not, stop trying to make fetch happen, Mr. Jackson, that's not what it is. And with so much other stuff that they could have been emphasizing on, they just spent way too much time on Jen McCabe's phone searches, and they just could have brought up the evidence and let it go. But they were really harping on some stuff. I think that some people didn't want to blame the McCabe's because they felt bad about the harassment that they were getting and stuff like that. Maybe they felt Jen McCabe was just being a very protective mother and didn't see her as being, aggressive and a matriarch like I did. They could see her as being a protective mother who doesn't want their daughter, having inappropriate words on her car with human secretions and stuff. But yeah, so my current thought is that the jurors didn't understand the assignment. And what I mean by that is I don't think that some of them realized that it should have just been about, did the Commonwealth prove their case that you were convinced that Karen Read backed into the car? I think some of them were under the impression that they had to be convinced of a cover-up because of how much emphasis the defense put on that in the thing. Jen McCabe herself even said, I would just talk to our little circle. And Alan Jackson didn't hit on that very hard. Why didn't he say something about Jen McCabe herself said she was only keeping in touch with her little circle, a little circle that Karen Read wasn't a part of. I think that Alan Jackson could have said some other stuff to be more summarizing about, how Jen McCabe was trying so hard to find out what happened to their friend. Everyone was freaking out and in a panic and in chaos, which makes absolute sense. But then, Miss McCabe, why didn't you, if the last person you thought John O'Keefe, your friend, your beloved friend was with, was Karen Read, and you're trying to figure out what happened, why would you not include Karen Read at least to begin with? But she was throwing Karen Read under the bus hard. And I think there were a lot of opportunities to see how close the Alberts and the McCabes and that little group was to push Karen out of. And, I think that they could have emphasized with some of the other witnesses of, Karen Read doesn't have anybody in either of these familials, like with this family or this family. She's just on the outside looking in. And they had so many good points that they just didn't wrap up as well as they could have. And I think that even though it was put on there, I just think that some of them, because they weren't convinced of the cover-up, they were like, well, then Karen Read did it. It was one or the other, instead of, we didn't really see a cover-up, but they didn't have to prove a cover-up. They had to prove that this happened. And I think that that's where some befuddlement may have occurred. I'm just trying to see it from the other point of view. Tell me if you've been involved in the Karen Read trial, what your point of view was, because I completely thought she was not guilty. I thought the Commonwealth and the investigation was full of baloney, bogus, and I could not stand Jen McCabe personally. Her personality was very grating, and that she was caught in so many lies. Trooper Proctor caught in so many lies. Brian Albert, Brian Higgins, all these people were caught in lies. And, there was so many things, and I would not have been convinced, but that's what would have happened. If I was in that jury, we would have ended up in a hung jury anyway, because I would have been just arguing so hard in that jury room. Somebody went, I'm not convinced of a cover. You don't have to be convinced of a cover-up. She didn't do it. The medical things show that this didn't happen. They used solo cups to collect evidence that could have been tampered with. It's insane. How could you see? No, I wouldn't even want to listen